What if the person who understands your emotions most clearly is not necessarily the safest person in the room? We tend to assume that empathy makes someone kind, that if a person can recognize your pain, anticipate your reactions, and seemingly feel what you feel, they must also care about your well-being. But empathy and character are not the same thing. The capacity to read another human being can support compassion, connection, and care. It can also provide extraordinarily useful information to someone who is entitled, exploitative, or willing to manipulate. This is where the idea of the dark empath becomes so compelling. A dark empath is not simply a narcissist doing a convincing impression of a sensitive person, nor is it necessarily someone who feels nothing and has learned the correct facial expressions. Research shows that some people can possess significant dark personality traits while retaining aspects of empathy. They may genuinely understand you and, in some cases, experience some emotional resonance with you, without consistently allowing that empathy to guide their behavior. And that combination can be both profoundly confusing and dangerous. Because when somebody seems to see you deeply, you naturally expect to be safer with them. Today we're going to look at what the term dark empath actually means, the psychological profile behind it, the important difference between cognitive and affective empathy, when empathy does not automatically produce kindness, and why highly sensitive and empathic people can be particularly vulnerable to this dynamic. Most importantly, we are going to look at how to recognize relational patterns without diagnosing everyone who has ever annoyed you in your life. Because discernment is not paranoia, it's the ability to remain open without abandoning the evidence. I'm Heidi, and this is Intuition on Tap, a place where intuition becomes clearer when your nervous system becomes more regulated. So, this is going to be a long one. I encourage you to make yourself a cup of tea, sit back, and enjoy. Let's begin. So, what is a dark empath? The term dark empath emerged from personality research examining what psychologists call the dark triad. This includes narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. These are dimensional personality traits, and that means a person can show elements of them without meeting the full criteria for a personality disorder and without having a formal diagnosis. Narcissistic traits can include entitlement, grandiosity, a strong need for admiration, and a tendency to place one's own needs above those of others. Machiavellian traits involve strategic manipulation, cynicism, calculation, and a willingness to use people to achieve a desired outcome. Psychopathic traits can include callousness, low remorse, impulsivity, shallow affect, and reduced concern about harming others. We're going to refer to the dark triad as dark traits for ease of reference throughout this conversation. And these traits do overlap, but they're not identical. They also exist on a spectrum. Having an occasional selfish, defensive, or manipulative moment does not make someone a psychopath, a narcissist, or a dark empath. Human beings are complicated, and sometimes we are simply having a very ordinary, bad day. We all have some narcissistic tendencies, but again, this does not mean that we have been diagnosed or, in fact, meet the criteria of diagnosis for a narcissistic personality disorder. Remember, it's on a spectrum. In the original research, investigators examined whether people with elevated dark triad traits could also report relatively high empathy. They identified a group they called dark empaths. Participants who scored high on dark traits while also scoring high on empathy compared with the traditional dark triad group. This group appeared less overtly aggressive than the conventional dark triad group, but it was not benign. It still showed antagonistic behaviors, including forms of indirect aggression such as malicious humor, guilt induction, and social exclusion. And that detail matters because the dark empath may not be the obvious bully kicking down the door. They may be the person who knows exactly how to make a cutting remark sound like concern. They may punish through withdrawal, recruit others into a conflict, expose a vulnerability as a joke, or make you feel responsible for the distress that they have created. Their interpersonal style can be more socially skilled, more emotionally literate, and therefore more difficult to identify. But we need to keep the science in perspective because dark empath is a research construct and not a recognized mental health diagnosis. So let's get that clear from the outset. It does not appear in diagnostic manuals, and the research base is absolutely still developing. So it shouldn't become another internet label pasted onto every charismatic or so-called toxic former partner that you've had. Its value is not in giving us a fashionable diagnosis. Its value is, in fact, in challenging a deeply embedded assumption. A person can understand emotion without being governed by compassion. Empathy is not one thing. To understand this, we need to stop talking about empathy as if it was a single magical substance that some people possess by the bucketful. Psychology commonly distinguishes between at least two components of empathy. These are cognitive empathy and affective empathy. Let's break this down. Cognitive empathy is the capacity to understand another person's internal experience. It is perspective taking. You can recognize what somebody may be feeling, identify what caused it, and predict how they are likely to respond. Affective empathy is the capacity to emotionally resonate with another person's experience. You do not merely know that they are hurt. Something within you responds to their hurt. And then there is empathic concern, sometimes discussed as a motivational component, or the desire to support or protect the person whose distress you perceive. These processes can work together, but they do not always. Someone may accurately understand your fear without sharing it. They may feel some of your sadness without feeling responsible for treating you well. They may even care in certain situations, yet switch that concern off when it competes with their status, control, or self-interest. That is why the statement, "they have heightened empathy," needs some qualification. The original dark empath study found a subgroup with elevated self-reported empathy alongside of their dark traits. But broader research does not show that people high in narcissism, Machiavellianism, or psychopathy generally possess superior empathy. A 2025 meta-analysis of 14 studies involving more than 5,000 participants found that narcissism was negatively associated with affective empathy, but not significantly associated with cognitive empathy. Machiavellianism was negatively associated with both forms, and psychopathy showed the strongest negative relationship with affective empathy. There was also considerable variation across the studies. So, the most defensible conclusion is not that dark personalities are secret super empaths. It is that some people with dark traits retain enough empathic ability, particularly perspective taking and social emotional perception, to read other people effectively. In some cases, aspects of emotional empathy may also remain present. What is unreliable is the translation of that information into consistent care. And self-reported empathy introduces another complication. A questionnaire can tell us how empathic a person perceives himself to be. It cannot always tell us how they behave when another person's needs inconvenience them. That gap between emotional insight and actual ethical behavior is where much of the confusion lives. Are they mimicking empaths, or are they actually empathic? The honest answer is both possibilities exist, and they can in fact overlap. Some people learn to mimic empathy. They recognize the socially appropriate words, facial expressions, and gestures. They may mirror your language, adopt your interests, and reproduce the performance of vulnerability because it creates trust. Think of the narcissistic person going into couples counseling. They learn the language, the tools, and they mimic the counselor to put out a convincing performance. But mimicry is not the whole explanation. Another person may genuinely notice emotional subtleties. They may have learned to monitor moods very closely in childhood. They may be highly observant, socially intelligent, or unusually accurate at identifying insecurity. They may even experience emotional resonance. The problem is not necessarily that the perception is false. The problem is what they do with the perception or the information. Imagine that you tell somebody you have always feared being abandoned. A compassionate person receives that information as something to handle with care. It helps them understand why consistency matters to you and is important in your relationship with them. A manipulative person receives the same information as a map. They now know which threat will destabilize you, what kind of withdrawal will make you chase them, and which reassurance will bring you back. The emotional intelligence may be real, but the intention is very different. This also explains why a dark empath can appear more convincing than a person who is simply emotionally detached. They may not be guessing randomly. They can be paying very close attention, and they can offer precisely the validation you have been missing. They may make you feel recognized in a way that is immediate, intense, and almost uncanny. For an empathic or highly sensitive person, that recognition can feel like energetic compatibility. Your body might register that intensity as significance, but intensity is not intimacy. And being accurately perceived is not the same as being safely held. The psychological makeup. So what might sit underneath this combination of empathy and darker personality traits? Well, first, there can be a pronounced focus on status, control, or self-protection. Other people's emotions matter, but often only in relation to the person's own needs. Your admiration may regulate their self-esteem. Your dependence may provide control. Your distress may confirm their sense of power. Your forgiveness may protect their preferred identity. Second, there may be selective or state-dependent empathy. What does that mean? Well, somebody may appear caring when they're calm, admired, or in control, yet become strikingly empathic when they're criticized, ashamed, rejected, or threatened. The empathic capacity has not necessarily vanished, but access to it may be overridden by defensiveness, entitlement, or rage. Third, there may be moral disengagement. The ability to justify harmful behavior so that it no longer feels incompatible with the person's self-image. They may tell themselves that, well, you deserved it, that they were only being honest, that your sensitivity is actually the real problem, that their manipulation was necessary because you would not otherwise understand, that punishing you is actually helping you to grow. In spiritual spaces, this can acquire impressive accessories. Control becomes leadership. Humiliation becomes shadow work. Boundary violations become energetic activation. Your discomfort becomes proof that you are resisting your healing. Same manipulation, much nicer vocabulary. Fourth, some people with these traits may experience vulnerability, shame, anxiety, or loneliness themselves. The original dark-empath group was not portrayed as emotionally invulnerable. They actually showed more negative emotion and lower social pleasure than typical empathic participants, although they did appear more socially capable than the dark triad group. This is important because harmful people are still human beings. They may carry trauma, they may feel pain, they may fear rejection. But understanding the origin of a pattern does not make you responsible for absorbing its consequences. Trauma can explain behavior. It does not automatically excuse repeated coercion, cruelty, or exploitation. And finally, empathy can be strategic. A person may use emotional understanding to charm, to persuade, to recruit allies, to build dependency, or preserve a favorable public image. Because they can read the room, they can adjust quickly. They may be warm with the people whose approval matters and contemptuous towards those who have less social power. That inconsistency is often more informative than the charm itself. Why empaths and highly sensitive people can miss the pattern. Empathic and highly sensitive people are not inherently naive. In fact, many are exceptionally perceptive. But perception becomes difficult to interpret when your nervous system is activated. If you have learned to monitor other people's moods for safety, you may be very good at detecting a change in tone, posture, or energy. Yet instead of using that information to protect yourself, you may automatically use it to manage the other person. You notice that they are withdrawing, so you explain more, or in fact, you might over-explain. You feel their shame, so you soften your boundary. You sense their childhood wound, so you minimize the adult behaving terribly happening right in front of you. You recognize that they are frightened beneath the anger, so you remain available while they make you responsible for their fear. This is empathy without adequate separation. And not everything you feel is yours. But even when you are accurately feeling the other person, that does not mean you must accommodate what they are doing. Your intuition may register, this person is wounded. Your conditioned nervous system may translate that into, therefore, I must stay. Those are not the same message. Highly sensitive people can also confuse emotional disclosure with emotional maturity. A dark empath may speak fluently about trauma, attachment, nervous system regulation, energy, or personal growth. They may cry. They may share painful stories. They may even understand therapeutic language better than you do. None of that tells you how they behave when you say no. The clearest information often appears at the boundary. Do they remain respectful when they don't get access to you? Can they tolerate disagreement without punishing you? Can they apologize without making their pain the center of the apology? Do they change their behavior or simply produce a more sophisticated explanation for it? Your sensitivity becomes an asset when it is paired with evidence and clear and healthy boundaries. Without those, it can be recruited into somebody else's emotional management system, and you can see this running rife in the spiritual space. What the pattern may look like. There is no defective dark-empath checklist, and isolated behaviors prove very little. What matters, however, is a repeated relational pattern. You may notice rapid emotional attunement. So, the person seems to understand your needs unusually quickly and creates a strong sense of being seen. You may notice precision-based cruelty. Their hurtful comments are not random. They target the vulnerabilities you disclosed in confidence. You may notice plausible deniability. The insult is disguised as humor. You know, we've all heard it. Oh, I was only joking. The control is framed as concern. The exclusion is described as a misunderstanding. You may notice guilt as leverage. Instead of discussing the impact of their behavior, the conversation becomes about how much your boundary has hurt them. You may notice selective compassion. They are extraordinarily empathic when empathy earns admiration, influence, or closeness, but strangely unavailable when care requires accountability or sacrifice or self-responsibility. You may notice public-private inconsistency. They are admired for being sensitive, healing, or emotionally intelligent, while people close to them experience intimidation, confusion, or chronic self-doubt. You may notice socially intelligent retaliation. Rather than confronting you directly, they withdraw approval, spread a carefully edited version of events, use mutual friends, or position themselves as the injured party. And we have all seen this occur multiple times across social media. You may notice that you have increasingly preoccupied with proving that you are kind, fair, loyal, or spiritually evolved. And that last sign matters. Healthy relationships may challenge you, but they do not require you to surrender your internal reality in order to maintain connection. Intuition, hypervigilance, and the body. When you encounter someone whose words communicate care but whose behavior communicates control, your body may register the contradiction before your conscious mind can even explain it. You might feel tightness, confusion, agitation, or a strange sense of being pulled closer while wanting to step back. This does not make everybody's sensation a psychic verdict. Your body can respond to past trauma, present risk, uncertainty, attraction, sensory overload, or several other things at once. The answer is not to declare, my nervous system says you're a dark empath. The answer is to slow the interaction down. Regulation gives you enough space to separate signal from activation. Ask yourself, what specifically happened? What did the person say? And what did they actually do? Is this a one-off rupture or a repeated pattern? What happens when I ask for clarification? What happens when I set a reasonable boundary? Do I feel clearer after our conversations or consistently more confused and drained? Intuition is not only the first sensation. It is the process of noticing, separating, regulating, and then checking what remains. Your body provides data, your observations provide context, and time reveals the pattern. The energetic and spiritual dimension. Now, I want to explore the energetic and spiritual side of this dynamic because this is often where empathic people feel the experience most strongly and where they can also become most confused. Psychology can measure traits, behaviors, and forms of empathy. It cannot confirm that somebody is reading your energy, accessing your soul, or creating an energetic cord. Those ideas belong to spiritual and experiential frameworks rather than established clinical fact, obviously. But that does not mean your energetic language is meaningless. It may be the language you use to describe subtle information your conscious mind has not yet organized. A shift in facial expression, a change in tone, an inconsistency in somebody's story. The emotional residue of an interaction or the way your body responds in their presence. The key is not to dismiss the experience or turn the interpretation into an unquestionable truth. You can honor what you sense and still test what you think it means. Energetic attunement is not spiritual maturity. Some people appear to be extremely energetically perceptive. They can enter a room and quickly identify who feels insecure, who wants approval, who holds influence, and who is emotionally available or unavailable. They may seem intuitive because their observations are accurate. They may know what you need to hear. They may reflect your language, values, and spiritual identity with remarkable precision. But energetic sensitivity, like psychological empathy, is a capacity. It's not proof of integrity. A person may perceive subtle emotional information and use it to support healing. Another may use the same information to gain access, establish authority, or create dependency. Being able to read energy does not tell you how someone will use what they read. Mirroring can feel like recognition. And in the early stages of a relationship, the dark-empath dynamic may feel deeply, deeply resonant. The person mirrors your interests, your wounds, your language, and aspirations. They seem to recognize parts of you that others may have missed. This can be interpreted as soul recognition, a past life bond, divine timing, or evidence that you share an unusually powerful energetic connection. Perhaps the connection does feel profound, but the spiritual explanation should never be used to overrule the relational evidence. Someone can feel familiar because they are safe. They can also feel familiar because their behavior activates an old attachment pattern your nervous system already knows very well. Familiarity is not always destiny. Sometimes it is repetition wearing incense. Emotional intensity can create an energetic hook. And so these relationships often move between intense closeness and painful disconnection. There may be periods of extraordinary validation followed by criticism, withdrawal, ambiguity, or emotional punishment. That unpredictability can create a powerful attachment. Your nervous system begins scanning for the return of warmth. Relief arrives when the person reconnects, and the relief itself can be mistaken for love, for healing, or for energetic confirmation. In spiritual language, you may describe this as an energetic cord or an inability to stop feeling the person. There may be value in practices that help you symbolically release that connection, but it's also important to recognize the biological component. Rumination, hypervigilance, and intermittent reinforcement can keep someone psychologically and physiologically present long after an interaction ends. You may not be receiving a telepathic message from them every time they enter your thoughts. Your system actually may be trying to resolve an unpredictable bond. This is why energetic clearing is most effective when it's paired with practical separation. Reduce contact, clear boundaries, removal of digital access, and emotional processing and support for the nervous system. You cannot sage your way out of a boundary you keep reopening. Spiritual language can also become a control system, and how many times have we seen this? The spiritually sophisticated dark empath may not say, "I want control over you." They may say something like, I don't know, that your guides brought them to you. They may claim to know what your soul wants more clearly than you do. They may tell you that your boundary is fear, your disagreement is ego, your discomfort is resistance to growth, or your desire to leave proves that the healing is working. They may present opinions as downloads, preferences as divine instruction, and consequences as karma. This creates a closed-loop system in which every response confirms their authority. If you agree, they are right. If you disagree, you are unhealed. If you leave, you are avoiding your lessons. This is not spiritual leadership, it's coercion with celestial branding. No ethical teacher, healer, coach, or intuitive needs you to surrender your discernment in order for their work to remain valid. The shadow can be used as a hiding place, and dark empath traits may also be concealed behind language about shadow integration. Of course, every person has a shadow. Every one of us can become defensive, self-serving, or manipulative. Mature spiritual work asks us to recognize those capacities and take responsibility for them. No spiritual bypassing here. Absolutely not. It does not ask, however, other people to tolerate repeated harm because, quote, we all have darkness. Integration means owning your impact. It does not mean aesthetizing cruelty as spiritual depth. A person who repeatedly wounds others or attacks others and then explains that they are simply comfortable with their shadow and they're just speaking their truth is not necessarily integrated. They may simply be articulate about avoiding accountability. So is it energetic contamination or nervous system carryover? After contact with a manipulative but highly attuned person, you may feel heavy, foggy, agitated, depleted, or just unlike yourself. You may describe this as absorbing their energy. That interpretation may fit your spiritual framework. At the same time, consider what else your system has been processing. Have you been hyper-monitoring their moods? Suppressing your real reactions, trying to prevent conflict, questioning your memory, holding emotional information they disclosed without reciprocity. What feels like energetic contamination may include very real nervous system exhaustion. You do not need to decide that the experience is entirely energetic or entirely psychological. Both frameworks may help you identify different aspects of it. The practical question, however, remains: what brings you back into your own center? That may include grounding, movement, sleep, time in nature, breath, journaling, clearing practices, contact boundaries, and conversations with people who help you remember what is true for you. The purpose of an energetic practice should be to restore your agency, not deepen your preoccupation with the other person. Use spiritual discernment, not spiritual certainty. If you receive a strong intuitive impression about somebody, resist the pressure to turn it immediately into a verdict. Record the impression, regulate your body, observe the behavior, let time provide corroboration. Healthy intuition does not need dramatic certainty to keep you safe. Sometimes it just simply says, slow down. You do not need to know whether somebody is a dark empath or an energy vampire, a karmic partner, or a wounded person acting from self-defense. You only need enough clarity to recognize that the connection is costing you access to yourself. And that is enough. That is sufficient information. How to protect yourself without becoming closed. If you suspect you're dealing with a manipulative but emotionally perceptive person, do not make proving their psychological profile your main project. You do not need to establish whether their empathy is cognitive, affective, selective, strategic, or performed before deciding that a behavior is unacceptable to you. Start here. 1. Assess behavior, not identity. Instead of asking, are they a dark empath, ask, do they repeatedly use private information against me? Do they respect consent? Do they take responsibility? Does their behavior change after an apology? 2. Disclose gradually. Trust should be built through consistency, not awarded because somebody creates an intense sense of recognition. Allow people to earn access to your vulnerabilities over time. 3. Use short boundaries. You do not need a 12-page spiritual thesis to decline something. The more you explain, the more material a manipulative person may have to debate. That doesn't work for me. I'm not willing to discuss this while I'm being insulted. I need time before I respond. Those are enough. You don't need to explain anymore. 4. Observe the response to your autonomy. Safe people may feel disappointed, but they can still recognize your right to choose. Manipulative people often treat autonomy as rejection, disloyalty, or an obstacle to overcome. So in other words, they take it personally. 5. Reality check outside the relationship. Speak with a trusted friend, a therapist, a qualified professional who's not invested in preserving the other person's image. Manipulation thrives in isolation and in ambiguity. 6. Regulate before re-engaging. Do not make major relational decisions in the peak of fear, guilt, or emotional flooding where possible. Step away, let your body settle, write down what occurred before the story is rewritten for you. And if there is coercion, intimidation, stalking, threats, financial control or abuse, please seek specialist support. This is no longer an interesting personality discussion. It is a safety issue for you that needs to be attended to immediately. The identity shift. The deepest shift for an empath is not learning to identify every dangerous personality type on sight. It's releasing the belief that understanding somebody obligates you to remain available to them. You can understand why a person behaves as they do and still leave. You can sense their pain and their trauma and their childhood wounding and still refuse to become its container. You can acknowledge their humanity without negotiating away your own. And you can accept that somebody may have genuine empathic capacity while also using that capacity in ways that are harmful. This is also an important maturation of empathy. Empathy is information, and compassion is a response. Integrity is a pattern of behavior. They are related, but they're not interchangeable. A person's ability to understand your emotion tells you something about their perception. It does not by itself tell you what they will do with what they now know. For that, you have to watch for the pattern. The concept of a dark empath invites us to move beyond a simplistic split between sensitive, caring people and cold, unfeeling manipulators. Human psychology is rarely that tidy. Some people with narcissistic, Machiavellian, or sociopathic and psychopathic traits may retain meaningful aspects of empathy. They may read people well, understand emotion, and even experience emotional resonance. That does not mean every such person is calculating every interaction, and it certainly does not justify diagnosing someone from a podcast, obviously. But it does mean that empathy cannot be used as proof of goodness, nor can spiritual language, intuitive ability, or apparent energetic or psychic sensitivity be used as proof of goodness. The better question is not, can this person feel me? It is, what do they consistently do with what they know about me? Do they use understanding to create safety or access? Do they respond to vulnerability with care and compassion and gentleness or leverage? Do they honor your boundaries or use emotional insight to move around them? Do their spiritual interpretations return you to your own authority or make you increasingly dependent on theirs? Your work is not to become suspicious of every emotionally intelligent person. Your work is to let discernment stand beside compassion. Because sensitivity needs boundaries, intuition needs regulation, and understanding another person never requires you to abandon yourself. If this episode has helped you put some language around an experience, you can explore more grounded support for empathic sensitivity, emotional separation, and nervous system regulation through my website, intuitionco.com. I'm also launching monthly clearings from August 2026 and highly recommend these as an affordable option to recognize, understand, and safely clear out any outdated behaviors and beliefs that might be holding you back. I use a combination of energy work, hypnosis, and guided processes to support you. I'll pop the registration link in the description below. You may also like to share this episode with someone who has been confusing emotional intensity with emotional safety. And please, I do ask that you click that subscribe button. It really does help. And thank you for listening today. And remember, regulation first, intuition follows. I also wanted to just gently end this episode by stating that this episode is educational and does not provide a diagnosis or replace personalized mental health or safety advice. Dark-empath is an emerging research construct, not a recognized clinical diagnosis. And if you are experiencing coercive control, abuse, or threats, please contact an appropriate domestic violence service, mental health professional, or emergency service in your location.